political economy of basic income implementation. So things like costing, design, and other political considerations like federalism, and so really kind of macro level topics. And so since I'll be talking about these topics in depth in 2 sessions this afternoon, this morning what I wanted to focus on was the political economy of basic income in terms of how we can actually build support around a basic income from regular people like you and I, as well as politicians. So to begin, I'd like to share my experience talking about basic income with non-advocates. And when I'm talking to them, I very often hear 2 common critiques or reasons why someone doesn't support the idea. The first is, of course, cost, and the second is work disincentives. And so what I've found is that when I actually engage with people a little bit more about what they mean when they say these things, I found that what they really have issue is not with cost or work disincentives directly. What they are actually saying is that these aspects of basic income are unfair. There's a little device going off here. I don't know. Okay, so what do I mean by this? So I've often found that when non-advocates say it's too expensive to implement, what they are really saying is that it isn't fair that I might have to pay more taxes for a benefit that I'm not going to receive. And so setting this issue of fairness aside, the issue for advocates is that their concern about taxes increasing isn't actually wrong. So here I've put up a very simplified table from a paper I've done on financing an income-tested basic income for Canada. And so the first column displays the division of the income into deciles, and the second column displays whether, after eliminating tax credits to finance the basic income, the change in disposable income for the household is positive or negative. And so I've also put a red box around the deciles that fall into Canada's middle class, which ranges between $33,000 and $103,000 at the national level. And so as you can see from the table, individuals in the first 5 deciles are net winners, and individuals in the last 5 deciles are net losers, because the increase in taxes actually outweighs the basic income they receive, or they earn too much to receive any of the basic income. So what this means is that actually 50% of voters in Canada are going to be better off in terms of their income under a basic income financed through modest tax increases. But, and this is a very big but, it's the individuals in the red box that we actually need to be concerned about in terms of getting their support. This is the main group of people who are really going to resist paying more taxes, since a lot of them think they're already over their head in taxes and that they're not getting government support in return. So their support is absolutely crucial for the implementation of Basic Income Canada, as politicians are not going to implement anything that's going to cost them votes from a group that has a lot of voting power. So the evidence in terms of the cost, from research I've done, and I've costed a basic income many different ways, and it's always this kind of outcome where the top 5 are winning and the bottom 5 are winning and the top 5 are losing. And so the people in these deciles aren't wrong that they're going to be paying more taxes. So the question actually becomes, is that fair? Before answering that, I'm going to quickly talk about work disincentives. And so a few months ago, we had a little policy summit for a thing we're working on for the BICN, and I was talking to Ron, and he said something that really resonated with me, and that was that politicians are not going to touch a basic income until the issue of work disincentives is addressed. And I completely agree with that. I think that's a huge barrier to the implementation of basic income. But I've also found that talking one-on-one with people, the issue that they have with work disincentives is also embedded in conceptions of their fairness. So it's not necessarily that people care that others aren't working, it's that they think it's unfair that they have to work to pay their bills, while basic income recipients can essentially get an income for doing nothing. And so we're still left, so regardless of whether they are right or wrong about that, we're still left with this lingering question of, is that fair? So, what does this mean for basic income advocates? Normally, and myself included, basic income advocates hear these concerns and we take them at face value. And so over time, I found that engaging with non-advocates, specifically those in the middle class, that these responses aren't effective because they're not actually addressing the real concerns of those who don't support the basic income, which is this aspect of fairness. This means that advocates need to identify ways to obtain support for basic income without confronting deeply rooted conceptions of fairness. Responding to critics by telling them what they think is fair is a counterproductive strategy. Individuals are entitled to their ideas and beliefs about what is and what is not fair. And indeed, that is why most of us are here today, I think. Imagine how difficult it would be for an opponent to convince you that your fundamental ideas about fairness, which is distributing a basic income to low-income individuals, is wrong. I think it would be very, very difficult for a number of people in this room to be convinced of that. So trying to change conceptions of fairness is also an inefficient strategy, since what someone perceives as fair is deeply rooted in their value systems and their upbringing and their life experiences, which are three things that are really just nearly impossible to change. So, if it is difficult and inefficient to change individuals' conceptions of fairness regarding these cost and work disincentive concerns, how can we gain support for basic income from opponents who are concerned about these things? My advice to advocates is to avoid triggering a sense of unfairness in the first place and bypass the issue of fairness altogether by reframing how we talk about basic income. And so we can't change conceptions of fairness, but what we can do is reshape how people think about basic income in terms of a number of distinct factors that constitute that person's picture of fairness. And so I'll give you a few examples of how to do that. So the first thing to realize is that everyone in this room, I assume, is constantly being bombarded with information about basic income. I'm constantly getting in my social media just things about basic income. So for me, it's really relevant in my life. But what you have to keep in mind is that many non-advocates don't know all the details that you do, and it always surprises me when I meet people that don't actually know what a basic income is, just because it's constantly in my life. So we have to remember that. So many of the strategies I'll get to in a second simply involve educating people about basic income and having them think about it in different ways than their automatic intuition would have them do so. Okay, so the first strategy to mitigate the cost concern is to appeal to self-interest and long-term uncertainty. So this simply involves explaining how basic income eligibility is based on need. This means that if someone who is currently high income or middle income ever becomes low income for whatever reason, they would be entitled to receive the basic income. And so I think that this strategy is a good way to address the cost concern, as it allows advocates to appeal to an important sense of uncertainty that many people, including those in the middle class, face in their day-to-day lives. Explaining the basic income in this way encourages opponents to think about how a short-term increase in taxes is simply an investment that covers all sorts of middle and long-term uncertainty related to their employment, their ability to save, and just random accidents and health issues that might come up. Okay, so the second strategy is, instead of just telling people that their taxes are going to increase as a result of the basic income, give them explicit, detailed information about their costs and the potential outcomes that a BIG might produce. For example, ask people how much additional taxes they'd be willing to pay to reduce poverty by over half of what it currently is. According to my own research, households, not individuals, but the whole household, in the top 5 deciles would on average have to pay about $5,000 more in taxes. So when you ask somebody that question, the amount they give might be above or below that, but what it does is anchor it for them in their own life. And so some people are obviously going to object to this, saying they're not willing to pay anything to reduce poverty. And in this case, the strategy is really limited. But the idea is to have people really think about how much they are willing to invest to get the type of society they want to live in. And a third strategy to address or mitigate the cost concern is to discuss the possible long-term impacts that that may result from individuals simply having more money in their pockets. So the two largest areas I can think of are probably health and crime. And so savings in these areas generated by a basic income could actually be redistributed back to middle income through lower taxes or more generous basic income in the long run. So either way, in the long term, the middle income individuals may be able to recover some of their short-term losses. Okay, so work disincentives. So I think work disincentives are probably one of the most common critiques of basic income. Recall from earlier here that the issue that individuals find is that they find it unfair that they'll have to work to earn an income while others receive free money. So without telling them that this conception of fairness is wrong, my strategies involve having them think critically about their own work and employment. So the first strategy is to probe reasons for why that person works. For many people, their concern about work disincentives is embedded in a very common and widely held conception of work because people tend to think only of the monetary benefits that work provides. But there are many other reasons individuals may decide to work, which can't be replaced by a basic income. So for example, basic income does not give recipients the social or psychological benefits that many obtain from working. So if these types of intangible benefits in that person's job are large, the individual is going to choose to maintain their employment so that as working inevitably gives them something meaningful that a basic income can't. So in this sense, advocates should challenge opponents to conceptualize their own work and ask them why it is they work and what non-monetary benefits they themselves derive from working. The second strategy is to discuss important types of work, such as childcare or elder care or volunteering, etc., that aren't currently compensated in the current system. So it's important to realize that the concern about work disincentives is rooted in a belief that the only productive contribution to society is employment in the formal labor market. But this belief fails to account for other types of important contributions that individuals can make to society. So if you were to inquire further about work that is currently not paid, advocates may be able to appeal to beliefs and values that people unknowingly hold about unpaid work. Often these are activities that people don't necessarily associate with the basic income, helping people do those things better. And finally, the third strategy is just to provide more details about design. A lot of the time when I talk to non-advocates and people that don't really know about basic income, they don't understand how a basic income can be designed to actually reduce work disincentives. And so one way to change beliefs about work disincentives is to actually educate people by explaining how a reduction rate works. And so one way to do so is by highlighting the fact that if a basic income is designed with a relatively small clawback rate, that means that individuals are always going to have more income if they're working. So they're always better off in terms of their income if they're employed. So there is an incentive there to work to maximize the amount of income that you're getting. However, and I can't emphasize this enough, whether you do or you don't think that there will be work disincentives, this issue stands as one of the largest barriers in terms of obtaining support from citizens and politicians. And I'm currently working on a few different ways to do this, so keep an eye out with my supervisor, Dion. But it is very much a concern that everyone in this room needs to deeply think about as we move forward in the basic income movement. So to conclude, I just wanted to revisit some of the main the key points that I hope you'll take home with you today. The first major point is that opposition to basic income is rooted in conceptions of fairness related to cost and work disincentives. And we have all heard these concerns and have tried to reason with people that hold these views. And the reason that this has largely been ineffective is because underlying their concerns is an issue of fairness that we do not address in our responses. The second major point is that individuals inevitably have beliefs about fairness and what constitutes a productive contribution to society. Because these beliefs are rooted in their life experiences and worldview, they are very, very difficult to change. As advocates, we cannot and we should not try to change what someone perceives as fair, as we cannot fully understand those perceptions without actually standing in their shoes. As such, mitigating these concerns requires a multi-pronged strategy that really takes account where the views of opponents are coming from, so that we can address what is really underlying their critiques. Thank you.